This is TWiT.
Food delivery isn't easy for Silicon Valley, and joining us to talk about that reality is Allison Griswold from Quartz. How's it going, Allison?
Good. How are you?
Doing awesome. It's great to have you back. You wrote a couple of pieces we're going to talk about today. First of all, the piece where you declared the golden era of VC-subsidized meals officially over. It's a big declaration. What are you seeing now that signals that declaration for you?
So recently you've seen a bunch of food delivery companies go out of business. There was Maple, which closed its doors in New York earlier this month. And then just last week you had Sprig, which was sort of like the Maple of San Francisco. They shut down. And you had Spoon Rocket before that. And you've just seen this pattern of a lot of companies that tried to deliver meals or deliver food on demand. They're all, not all, but many of them are having a very hard time. And the first thing you start to see, if it's not that they go under, is they reduce their discounts and they increase their fees.
Is there something about kind of the localization of some of these services too? Like there are services that serve, all across the United States, and then there are these like hyper local ones. Does that put them at a disadvantage in this market?
It's hard to say. So I think a lot of this is a hyper-local business, right? The sort of quintessential example of a successful food delivery company is you have Seamless in New York. And Seamless is huge in New York. A ton of people use it. It's owned by Grubhub, but it has an independent brand because it was acquired by Grubhub when it was still Seamless, and they just kept the branding. And that, like, despite Postmates and DoorDash and Maple and all these other companies that had some users, like Seamless is just far and away the dominant company in New York. But then you have other cities where there's just sort of a mix. And because they're new, there isn't as much brand loyalty. And it is more, like you're saying, it's more of a market specific thing in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Along with a lot of these startups, there is a bit of, hubris and kind of just rhetoric around changing, how we eat food, how we consume food. There are these grand ideas from a lot of the startups that have been investing in subsidizing these meals as these companies, as you've pointed out, have been going under. Does the premise still hold, but it's just going to be a more expensive thing to do and pull off? Or are companies just like literally giving up on this whole concept of trying to add this, tech layer over the top of food delivery?
Well, it's tough because one of the things that's interesting about food delivery is when you had a lot of these companies start, especially the ones that sort of manage the whole process, right? Like a Maple, where they made their food and they sourced their ingredients and then they delivered it to you, is their pitch was sort of, because we control the entire supply chain, we can extract inefficiencies that other people haven't been able to. And so that's how we're going to give you really nice food at a low cost. But for a long time, I was talking to a lot of these companies and I would say, like, give me an example, right? What are you doing to improve your supply chain? And they would sort of say, oh, it's really complicated. We can't get into it. And I think what we're seeing now is that maybe some of those inefficiencies that we promised to extract weren't extracted. I don't know, like the model hasn't panned out the way that it was pitched initially.
Yeah, and you have to wonder if this is a matter of technology minds not understanding the food industry to a certain degree. Although I have to imagine with the amount of money that goes into something like this, hopefully, they bring in the people that do understand the food industry to the point to where they can solve these problems. Yeah,
it's funny because a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to David Chang, who's sort of the famed restaurateur who owns Momofuku, and he put his name on Maple, and he subsequently started another food delivery startup. And he said something to me like, people in tech think food is simple because it's food, but it's not simple. Like, it's actually kind of complicated, and there are a lot of layers to it. And just because you're good at tech doesn't mean you're good at food.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about demand? I mean, are people lining up to sign up for these services, or maybe demand is lower than what they require?
Yeah, so I think, the demand is definitely there for, if you think in the broadest sense, right, of food that is delivered to us. Domino's is huge, and they deliver pizza. That's their fundamental business model. Seamless, which is owned by Grubhub. Grubhub is doing quite well. Their last earnings, they performed extremely well. Their stock was up. But a lot of the sort of startup companies, what they did was for a long time, they came in and they gained customers and they got you to order things from them by giving you a lot of discounts, because everyone likes discounts, right? Mm-hmm. If you give me free money, I like that. I like free money. And then at some point they had to start trying to make their business more profitable. So they took the discounts away. And that is a very hard transition, because once you give someone something for free, they don't like to start paying more for it.
I'm glad that you mentioned Domino's. Obviously, that's a relatively successful delivery-based business, but all they do is make pizza, right? Where, for example, Sprig, they were making meals. They had their own people that were like actually cooking things and delivering those. Is there a difference between maybe say like the Grubhubs and the Postmates of this world that are delivering other people's food versus the companies that are trying to make food and have their own chefs and things like that?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference. So the Postmates that are just delivering food, I think we could say they're more of a pure middleman, right? Because the value that they are adding is just that delivery piece. They are a service that exists between you and the place where you're ordering from. And the ones that make their own food, they're sort of like both the middleman and the original supplier combined into one. So it's interesting because there's kind of a debate among these companies, which is the more successful model. And by more successful, I mean, again, you have the companies that are in sort of the make and deliver the food camp, like the Sprigs, the Maples, that believed if you controlled the whole supply chain, you were better equipped to control your costs. And then you have the companies that are sort of like the Postmates and the DoorDash. And what they think is that you don't want to deal with having any of that inventory. You know, it's better to be assetless. And the money to be made is just by being the service in the middle.
So do you think at the end of the day, Superman, also known as Amazon, like flies in and is like, hey, we got this. Peace out, everybody.
Hot
like,
dogs by drone or something?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. Could happen. I mean, is it going to take somebody of that, or like a company of that caliber to really crack this nut? Because you know the demand is there. People want this sort of thing.
Yeah, it's hard to say. You know, I think one thing that's potentially formidable about Amazon, and it's still very early, but you can totally envision a world in which free food delivery is just something you get with Amazon Prime, right? Maybe they increase the price of Prime, so instead of $99, it's like $115. I'm just making this up, but you also get, you know, with that, you get unlimited free food delivery, and that's something that Amazon could do because Amazon has its cloud business and that makes a lot of money, and they just reinvest it into sort of their consumer-facing services. And most of the food delivery companies don't have an alternative revenue stream like that to bolster their business models. They're just working with whatever venture capital funding they have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, from food delivery to people delivery, you wrote last week about how Uber is charging riders based on their ability to pay, price discrimination in the article, but that it's not inherently a bad thing, at least according to some economists. How does this pricing model work exactly?
Yeah, so this pricing model is sort of a natural evolution out of a thing Uber had been doing called upfront pricing. And just in case people aren't familiar, upfront pricing is where Uber, when at the time at which you order a ride, they tell you your ride will be $14.26. And then you hit yes and you accept it. So at the time at which you take the ride, you've already agreed to the price. And what upfront pricing did that was significant was it eliminated consumer-facing surge pricing, which was where Uber would show you sort of the blue multiplier that said, demand is off the charts. Like, this ride is 2.5 times what it normally is. And that didn't mean the ride wasn't more if demand was there. They just weren't telling you. So it was sort of hidden. It was built into the price implicitly. And so what they're doing now with route-based pricing is they're charging people based on how much they think those people are able to pay, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and how is that analysis done on the side of Uber? Is it just past behavior in the app? Is it region? Like, how is that determined?
So we don't know too much about it. Most of the details were reported by Bloomberg. And what they said was that it's sort of based on your neighborhood. So if you live in say you have two people and they both get an Uber and they're going one's going to destination A and the other's going to destination B. And the routes are the same in that they're the same distance. It's going to take the same time. There's the same amount of traffic. But A is like a nice ritzy neighborhood and B is a less nice ritzy neighborhood. The person going to A might get charged more because Uber evaluates that and says, oh, they're going to this nice fancy neighborhood. We can charge them more.
Has there been any backlash to this? Because, I mean, the first thing that I really honestly think when I hear this is it makes me not want to use Uber anymore. And in fact, we've seen airlines that, you know, if you're buying on your phone versus buying in a computer, or if you're buying and they can determine your location is this city versus that city, or this neighborhood versus this neighborhood, and the pricing changes, and there's a genuine consumer backlash and concerns over what is essentially price discrimination. Has there been any backlash or negative reaction to what Uber's throwing out here yet?
So this is a really good segue because this gets to the point, right? Like you hear this and as an average consumer, you think this is discriminatory. This isn't fair to me. I'm being exploited based on whatever Uber has surmised about my characteristics. But what an economist thinks when they look at this is, oh, this is efficient. You know, like they're being charged what they can pay. And the thing is, efficient for an economist, efficient doesn't necessarily mean good, right? Like efficient and morally good are two different things. But in the world of economics, what they would say is that the difference between what you are willing to pay, like if you're willing to pay $20 for something and you're charged $15, the difference between those two, that $5, is considered the consumer surplus is the term for it. And so why this is efficient economically is because Uber is just collecting all the consumer surplus. They know you would pay $20. They're charging you $20 and there is no consumer surplus. Most of us don't think like economists. Right. So we hear this and we think Uber is ripping me off.
Well, yeah, and I wonder how many of the average, Uber consumers, the Uber riders, actually know that that's happening on the back end. Where else I'm curious if you know, and I should have gone looking for this myself, but I didn't think about it until just now, where else this model exists. And if it exists in other places, which I'm sure it does if economists are saying that it's a super efficient system, does the consumer know about it there? And you know what I mean? Like how does that play with their desire to use the service in other examples?
Well, like you said, airlines are a really good example. Airlines are notorious for charging people more based on how high the demand is because of the time of year or the destination or like a whole lot of different factors. And they've gotten in trouble for it. There have been several investigations into airlines and their pricing tactics to see if they're fair. Amazon got in trouble years ago because it had figured out based on cookies if people were new customers or returning customers. And if you were new, it would show you a lower price for some items than someone who was a returning customer. And there was a big consumer backlash against that. And if I'm remembering right, the CEO said, we won't do this anymore because it just wasn't worth it. I mean, the amount of money that they were making relatively on that, I assume, didn't make up for how upset people were about it.
Right.
What about rival services like Lyft or any others out there? Is anyone else trying a similar tactic?
So we don't know if Lyft and Juno and some of the others are necessarily doing this route-based pricing model. But like if you've ever taken Lyft line, you'll know that it's the same in terms of the upfront pricing, right? Where you order a Lyft line, which is like the pooled Lyft service, and they give you a price and you agree to the price. So maybe it's like $465 or something, right? And so I think that the bigger point is that we don't know if they're doing it, but they could be, because this like upfront pricing model of showing you a price and asking you to agree to it is sort of the natural step that comes before where Uber has gone with it.
And Uber's, proving that it can work to a certain degree anyways. We'll see how much longer that lasts. Thank you so much, as always, for coming on, Allison Griswold from Quartz.com. And you can follow Allison at Allison Griswold on Twitter. Really appreciate you coming on and talking about a few of your stories today. Thank you.